Really excited to be here. Glad I'm still moderating. Thanks, Tyler. All good. First of all, I just want to thank the entire audience here today, all of those founders and startup members and medium companies and small companies. Thank you so much. And to the government folks here, thanks for all of your service as we work together on solving our nation's hardest problems. I want to introduce our very esteemed panel today. They're going to have some really great insights for all of us. First, we have Mike Brown here. Mike's a partner now at Shield Capital. In retirement from DIU, he's looking very sprightly, very well rested. Great to have you, Mike. Thank you. Ben Van Roo here. He's the CEO and co-founder of Yurts Technologies, which is an enterprise platform for generative AI models. Thanks for being here, and thanks for serving on the advisory council at GlobalSoft too. We've got Tyler Rowe, who's a principal at AE Industrial and a member of AEI HorizonX, which is the venture capital investment platform that works with Boeing. So we're really interested to hear about your 12 years of experience looking at startups. No pressure. And then we also have Wesley Spurluck, who, as you all may know, is now working as a senior advisor at the Office of Strategic Capital. I think some of us might have some questions on what they're up to in the Department of Defense. Thanks for being here. You know, his background is as the strategic capital chief at AFWorks. So tremendous experience in this panel here. And just to get started, I've asked the panel to take a couple of minutes to talk about what they do, what they're seeing in both the private and government funding side. So over to you, Mike.
Okay, well, thanks, Jamie. As you mentioned, I'm now on the other side of government, now on the private sector side, but doing some similar things in terms of looking for which companies can provide commercial technology to our military, as well as be successful in commercial markets. So the great news is it's never been a better time for entrepreneurs who are interested in national security applications. Just give you some numbers, $7 billion has been invested in 2021 and 2022 in defense tech. That's 7 times the amount that was invested 4 years prior. So that's the good news. The bad news is there's $350 billion invested every year. So we're still a very small part of the total venture investment. And so I'd love to see that 7 billion grow to about 70 billion. And there's one simple thing that we can do to make sure that that happens, which is we need to make some changes in DoD's processes so that we've got an effective mechanism to acquire and budget for that commercial technology. And frankly, from being inside the government, it's not so much the acquiring part. There's been a lot of reform on acquisition. OTAs are being used more and more. It's really the budgeting side. So if you're a 4-star, like, we just heard from General Raymond, if he sees something that he says is exciting, he can't make that happen for his service to be able to buy what he thinks is interesting. Why? It takes 3 years to program $1 of spending at DoD. So that lag is a killer for young companies that live and die on cash flow. So if we can make the changes so that there's more flexibility, and there's some movement happening now on the appropriations committees to create this, if we can make that change so that there's some flexibility so that our 4-stars, our senior DoD leadership have some flexibility. I'm looking at Admiral Selby who directs ONR. He said the same thing. The budget's kind of fixed. I don't have much flexibility to move dollars around. If we can fix that, we can attract so many more entrepreneurs and investors who are interested in backing those entrepreneurs to get more and more of commercial technology to serve the military. And that's what I'm focused on doing these days.
Thanks, Mike. Ben, as the entrepreneur on the panel, the co-founder, the CEO, we're not outnumbering you here today, but we'd really love to hear what your perspective is. What are you seeing today? What are some of the great things coming?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for letting me attend. And I'd like to thank Tyler for doing me a solid. I'm on a panel with a bunch of capital. So I'm, as a startup founder, I'm seeing that, and that's fantastic. No. So real quickly, my whole family's military. My brother's wing commander. My father was a squadron commander. So I did not serve. I was the nerd with bad eyes. So I was not a pilot. But in grad school, I worked with Rand Corporation and Project Air Force for several years, and then went back into startup land and built a national security team at a company called Primary AI. And about a year and a half ago, I was looking at this technology, large language models, and thinking that these companies like OpenAI were kind of dropping the ball. So good one on me for starting that company at the time. No, but we're really focused on how do you bring generative technologies into enterprise? How do you think about smaller form factors? If you don't have a million GPUs, you want to deploy to austere environments, you want to keep your data safe and secure. And it's been, needless to say, a very interesting 6 to 12 months in this space. And so what I'm seeing is, at least in the last, I can give you the last 6 or 7 years, it has been outside of my current role, a night and day shift for small companies to work and partner with the Department of Defense. If you look back and Tyler and I have discussed this in a couple of use cases, if you look back at the Project Maven days when there was a lot of blowback from the tech sector in Silicon Valley, not really understanding what the role and what the importance is of the DoD, it was a very different feeling then being out there, and I felt a little bit of fish out of water, trying to bring the technologies into the DoD. And the other side was true. The opportunities for small businesses even 5-6 years ago was different. DIU was, I would say, still on its path to best finding its way. AFWorks was just kicking off. Tradewinds didn't really exist. And so it's a very, very exciting time. What I am seeing is the pace of change of the tech sector is still far outpacing the change of reform. And so there's work to do. And I think on the other side of it is there's a lot of education that needs to be done for the venture community to understand how much opportunity there is in this world. And so with that, I'll pass it off.
Thanks, Ben. So Tyler, over to you. As a venture focused individual who now works with a big prime.
Sure.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing and hearing and what your approach is?
Yeah. And I can also speak to, kind of our macro thesis and clear up any confusion that's maybe come up in the market too. First off, if you guys can all bear with me, I'd really like to acknowledge Tyler, Enrique, and Chrissy and Peter, wherever they are. We co-led their A round 8 or 9 months ago, and I get goosebumps talking about this because we really set out on this journey together, and to see everybody in this room and all the platforms out there is so special, it's easy to come in, as a venture capitalist, and write an important investment memo and have these visions of grandeur, but to actually see this team put this together is so cool. And it's a real testament to you guys as leaders. So hats off. And also to speak on this panel alongside you guys, it's tremendously humbling. So thank you for the opportunity. With regard to what we're seeing in the market, kind of considering public and private financing, we don't think that there's a real panacea, right? We think it's going to be subjective and case by case. But ultimately, what we want to always get back to is a hybrid model of sorts where we can come in, offer private injection of capital, but then there can be, public non-dilutive capital at the same time. Because ultimately, in this great power competition, if we don't truly partner with each other and marry these two sectors of capital, I think we may lose. I think that we'll be disadvantaged in the race. Additionally, there's one more thing that I'd like to speak to, in kind of representing the venture community here, and that is humility. You made an interesting point, around as VCs, and people who've had success in Silicon Valley and maybe the commercial sector. There's a lot that we do not know about the defense market and that we can learn from you all. There's a lot of people that have been at this for a very long time. And I think that we can exercise a lot more humility in coming in for this partnership and ultimately the longevity of what we're all trying to accomplish together.
Thanks, Tyler. Over to you, Wes. So you're the one still in government, But first, we would really love to hear what's going on with you over at the Office of Strategic Capital.
Hey, thank you, Jamie. And thank you everybody for having us here today. We're really excited to talk to you. As some of you may know, some of you may not, recently, December, the Secretary of Defense stood up a new office, the Office of Strategic Capital. And with the intent, our mission being to attract and scale private capital towards national security objectives, specifically in the technology sector. And what that means to me is that there's a lot of, how do we convince investors to quit investing in software on how to make fetch a thing and start focusing in hardware like quantum and the critical technologies of the Department of Defense. And what that means is like looking at some of the tools that are used elsewhere in the federal government, but not currently used at the Department of Defense, to make sure that when we go into this competition, that we are bringing all the tools in the toolbox. And, you know, for up until now, we've spent a lot with contracts and grants and a lot of the different SBIRs and OTAs and a lot of the different things, especially some of the work that Mike Brown, the team at DIU and AppWorks have done over the years. But there's other options out there, and there's other ways to incentivize our really our competitive advantage in this competition, our private capital markets, our technologists, and our entrepreneurs. How do we help incentivize them to want to work with us, to be our partners, to help us solve these problems, but to do it in a way that works for them? We can't keep expecting our private sector to just do it because it's the right thing to do. Our fund managers can't do that. They have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure they're giving the returns. But if we can structure things in a way that can help them do that and contribute to national security and help develop the technologies that will be critical to our success in the future, then that's a win-win for us and a win-win for the taxpayers. So that's kind of what we're working on. A lot of that goes around us learning where we can be effective in these markets. And so the last couple of months has been a lot of focused on working with partner agencies that have been doing this, with programs like the SBIC program that we partnered with the SBA on, that have been working on this type of problem since 1958. In 1957, we saw Sputnik come across the sky, and then we stood up programs like the SBIC to help incentivize our investors to help us in this problem set. And that's what we're working on now, and what we look forward to working with you guys on in the future.
Thanks for that. So we've heard a lot already this morning about how this is a really exciting time for private and government funding and this partnership that we have out there. I do want to kind of take a step back and talk about where we've been. How did we get here? Why are we here? Is it the threat? Do we really need to have this innovation bringing folks together? So I'm going to start with Mike here, and maybe you can tell us some stories from your experience, maybe from DIU, but why are we here? How did we get here?
Well, I think the threat is one part of the story, but I go back to Ash Carter back in 2015. He really saw the need to rely more on commercial technology because that's where a lot of the innovation was happening. I'd say he was one of the first folks. He wrote a paper back to 2011, basically acknowledging that the landscape had changed from the time when he was a young man. If you go back to the 60s and 70s, the technology the Defense Department needed, it was creating itself. Silicon Valley is a product of that. The semiconductor industry was started by Department of Defense. So 30% of the semiconductor output, the entire industry output, was used by the Apollo program in the 1960s. So the Defense Department and NASA were early adopters, early customers, taking the risk. And of course, by providing those early contracts, they were the funders of that industry. Silicon Valley wouldn't exist without it. So I go back to his thinking that regardless of the threat, more of the technology the Defense Department needs is being created outside. The current CTO of DoD said there's 14 technologies important for national security. 11 of those 14 are being developed by the commercial sector. So you can look at some where the Defense Department is still the first mover, hypersonics, directed energy. So there are still those examples, but most of what we need, whether it's AI, cyber, autonomy, in the future, synthetic biology, those technologies are being developed by the commercial world in Silicon Valley, Route 128, and other innovation centers around the country. So it's that fact that began changing in the 70s, but we've very much been on the other side of that now. That really is the need for the Defense Department to be closer to the commercial sector. And Fortunately, Ash started a number of different things, DIU being one, Defense Innovation Board being another, Defense Digital Service. He started a number of things to try and increase that connection with commercial technology and the military. But we're still in the early days. I think if he were here today, he would be spurring us on to go faster and make sure that we make that connection much tighter than we see it today.
And Ben, as a co-founder and an entrepreneur here, can you tell us what attracts you to this market? Why work in national security? I mean, you've heard how difficult it can be to get in, to be successful. Why are you here?
Yeah, so there's probably a part of it that's family, and it's maybe all I ever really knew growing up. But I think there's actually a lot of vision. We talked a lot about Valley of Death and small companies not being able to find their footing. But the other side is kind of true. If you do know your way and you do have connections, you can be a little bit visionary on, hey, this is the type of product that we think we want to go and build and co-develop. And you can't do that as much in other industries. So I think there's a really good opportunity when you are working in cutting edge areas of technologies, and you maybe actually can navigate the system a bit to lean in and say, I think this is where the future is going. So for me, first and foremost, it is something that I believe in. I think there was an opportunity as a small company to lean in and be a dual use technology and navigate that early. There's a lot of blowback right now by the venture community saying, oh no, just be one or the other, or get your Series C and then you can go into defense tech. And I think that's short-sighted, especially in fields like AI, where 3 years from now, I'm not quite sure where my field's going to be. I can barely speculate where it's going to be about 18 months from now. And so I think we need companies to be in on the ground floor. And it's not just respectfully, it would not just be the primes or the major players that are doing, the Palantirs of the world. And they'll all do wonderful, but there's going to be room for the small companies. So I think that's all true. And finally, I actually think the hard work of the DIUs, the AFWorks, the opportunities that frankly, like Tyler and I were talking about, me getting in, our company getting in certain locations on certain networks, that there's no way I would have access to do that for several years. So I think a lot of the pieces are just finally coming together right now. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe lastly, I'd say the kind of the rise in the awareness of China and the war in Ukraine is something that I observed shifted Silicon Valley's mentality. It felt like overnight, especially because a lot of us were working with people in Ukraine. And the first reaction was, how do we get these people out? And then I think there's a broader like, hey, what are we doing in national security? And that, again, feels different than maybe 5 or 6 years ago for the common engineer that has no affiliation with the DoD.
Thanks for those. So don't worry, we're going to come back to dual use and we're going to come back to Ukraine in a little bit. Tyler, over to you here for a second. Can you, in your experience, talk about what makes the national security space so unique or different from some of the other areas that you've looked at previously, and what is it that you're most excited about in terms of technology right now?
I think one really compelling area that we're seeing pretty frequently is that we've got a lot of former operators now in the decision seat in national security, right? I mean, Second Front's a fantastic example, right? I mean, you've got Tyler and Peter and Enrique who, were on the front lines and understood the exact problem that now they're back trying to solve for, right? And a lot of other industries, they're people solving fantastic problems, just not as mission critical. It's not as much of a mission critical set of problems, right? And I think, kind of getting to be involved, with that, high pressure level of criticality every day, to me, adds a layer of importance to it. I also think there's a real, kind of defining moment that we're on the cusp of right now, where your OEMs, your Boeings, your Raytheons, your Lockheeds, for example, have been, operating in this highly regulated space with antiquated software and antiquated programs, right? Through the commercial sector and through a lot of these operators coming back from the front lines who know the needs of these mission sets, we're able to now take these modern technologies and apply them, into these businesses that forever, were at the forefront of American innovation, So I think there's so many reasons to be excited about it.
Thanks. Wes, so you've got a great background coming from AFWorks. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience while you're at AFWorks? What was difficult in the beginning? What works well? How did it get you prepared to really give the Office of Strategic Capital what it needs to be successful?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the SIBR program and really what Dr. Rathje Jason, the director of Office of Strategic Capital, started up and brought online a lot of new ways to work, whether it was asking industry for what works for you with the open topic concept. Like, instead of going and telling you that, hey, we'll give you a requirement and you'll solve it, because we're going to come to you and say, hey, we want a faster horse. Just because that's what we're used to doing. We provide a requirement, they meet it. In some ways, if we come to industry and say, this is the problem we need to solve, and you come to us a solution, tell you what, we'll find the warfighter that can use that. We'll work together. We'll find a partnership. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that, that's led to a lot. I think it was like 70% of the AFWorks SIBRs last year had not worked with the government before. And as we were talking about in the green room, it's hard to hate people when you know people. And so building those relationships and starting to understand what people are trying to do and what they're trying to achieve, knowing that for the most part, a lot of the folks that we work with, a lot of people in this room are very, they have a calling for something greater than just just their job. This is not just a job for, I know, a lot of the people in the DoD, but this is also not just a job for a lot of people in this room that are working to find ways to be impactful and do their job. The other part of that, and what we brought on with programs like the StratFi program, was that we have to make a bigger impact. We have to make a bigger splash, but we have to do it alongside private capital. We have to incentivize, if we can come to the table and bring money, and private capital comes alongside us, now we've aligned our incentives to where if we win, we both win. And I think that's really key going through this phase. One of the limitations we kind of got to, and really what we've seen in a lot of this space, and you'd be interested in others' opinions, is a lot of the time when we talk about research to prototype with these technologies, we found ways to kind of get those early dollars out there from the DoD and be a partner. But then we get from prototype to product, and then product to scale, and we're kind of just asking industry and investors to solve that problem for us. And we've seen that doesn't necessarily work. One, because of just incentives and returns, and but also two, because we have other people that are manipulating our markets in ways that are not advantageous to us, and in ways, a lot of those early stage investments we've made, we're seeing other people that are not us, or not the taxpayers, is not the DoD, realizing the returns on those investments. And I think that's what's critical as we start to move into those next stages, and making sure that how can we be the most efficient with the DoD dollars, but how can we do it at a time that works on a timeline with our private sector investment partners, and how can we do it in a way that's more effective to where we can align and they can come back, they can go back to their investors, they can go back to the people that have trusted them and still make the returns they need to make. But also contributing to national security. It'll be much more efficient for all of us, and it'll be much more efficient for the taxpayers. But foremost, it'll allow us to operate at a speed with technology in which the private sector is working. And those are the ways we're trying to shape these tools. And a lot of that is predicated on what we learned at AFWorks as we continue to develop that, and making sure that we're being good partners in that space. Because if we don't provide value and we don't become a good partner, then we're just a lot of noise, and we're really trying to not be that.
Thank you for that. So we've talked a little bit about where we came from. What I'd like to do now is talk about where we are. And this is the part where we get to talk about the obstacles and the challenges. And as a director at Pallas, I get the unique opportunity to hear the complaints on the government side and the challenges on the private side. So we're going to spend some time unpacking that a little bit, but all with the idea and aim to talk about what works well. What are some great lessons learned? And so, Mike, I'm putting you back on the spot here for a second. Some of the obstacles and challenges that the private sector faces. And when you were in the seat at DIU, what were you thinking? How were you brokering or mediating or creating opportunities for those problems to be solved? But if you could say one thing to those companies who are feeling frustrated right now, what would it be?
That you have to be patient because things don't change in Washington in a short period of time. There is a lot of good examples that we see, though. We've learned over the history of DIU that we can take a military problem, we can translate that into commercial terms, and we can attract a wide number of vendors. On average now, for every problem DIU sends out to the marketplace, 45 companies respond. So to the point that Ben was making earlier, there's been a sea change since the Project Maven days. Plenty of companies want to work with DoD, and I think you're right. Ukraine helped sharpen the focus. There are forces for good and forces for evil in the world, and the U.S. military is clearly on the side of forces for good. So that part is not an issue anymore. So really, at DIU, we again showed that many companies want to participate, and we got a number of companies, 50 to 60 now, that have production contracts with the military. But that's still, just a drop in the bucket compared to what the needs are and the number of companies that want to help. So the challenge now is on the scaling. And the reason or the cause for the scaling challenge is back to the money. So how can the money move more quickly so that when our DoD leadership sees an important problem, there's a chance to, within the current budget cycle, get money allocated to get that new capability in. That's important to respond to threats that are emerging on the horizon, but also to leverage new technology that is developed by commercial companies within one budget cycle of the U.S. government. So I'll just return to that. If the department were able to have more flexibility to actually buy what they see that they would like to have and modernize the force faster, then we'd have a lot more companies, entrepreneurs that are looking to serve national security needs, because these are important problems. They're interesting to work on, but young companies need that cash flow. So that's what we need to make the system work and be able to scale. We've already proven we can prototype. We've proven that commercial technology can solve military problems, and you only have to look at the news from Ukraine to see that happening every day. Who would have thought that a commercial company providing the communications backbone for the entire country at war? It's amazing what's been done there. Taking the government's key records and making that resilient by getting those off government servers and putting those outside Ukraine before the war started. There's lots of stories now where the commercial sector came in and really helped there. And those same technologies can help our military modernize faster if we can find out how to get the money moving more quickly.
It's super helpful. Ben, it's time to get vulnerable.
All right, here we go.
All right, ready for the next question. So I want to know what keeps you up at night. So you're a CEO of a small startup. You want to do business with the government. What keeps you up at night? What are you thinking about? What are you worried about? I think it's important for the government here to understand what the sorts of strategic decisions that you're thinking through and trying to solve when you're trying to work with the government or wait for funding to arrive.
So this is very, very easy. Either my 3.5-year-old or my 1.5-year-old is without a doubt. What keeps me up at night is obviously there's all things related to my company. There are a few competitors that you may have heard of in this space, or their partners, however you want to look at it. I've had a really fortunate opportunity where since the day I started the company, even beforehand, some of you may or may not know, I got personally looped into the entire reauthorization process for SBIRs. And it's a strange story, but I got to kind of see how that unfolded. And AFWorks was this incredible beacon of how you guys thought about getting new companies involved. And so when I did launch the company, I understood SBIRs and OTs, had friends at InQtel, a bunch of good friends at DIU. And so I felt like I kind of knew the lay of the land. But what keeps me up at night were the timing of it all. It is the working capital. And I know everyone kind of value of death it gets, it's kind of gets beaten up and recycled every day. But the reality is, like, I've had incredible access with Soft Week last week. If any of you were there, they did a new thing this year where you had one-on-ones with the PEOs, and we may or may not be doing something with some of those folks. And I got to present to them, and that type of access is insane. It's incredible. But the clock, we do have to be patient with Washington. But when you're a small company of 5, 10, 20 people, you're just thinking about, like, are we going to survive another 18 months? Is this contract going to hit in time? What's going to happen with continuing resolution? Well, how am I going to handle the DD 254? And, like, can I get on the right networks? And so there's, which is all fair and good things, but that takes time and money that you don't have as a startup. And so there's this, like, am I going to go and do this in the national security space, or do I punt? And you're constantly thinking about that. And it doesn't matter if you have tons of friends, the people that I know in this space, but I don't know if I'm making the right decision or not. And in a space that I think is extraordinarily important for the national security community, and I still have pause.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Brene Brown would be really proud. She speaks on vulnerability. So thank you. Tyler, AEI HorizonX is with Boeing. Some folks are concerned about the relationship with primes and what that would mean for startups and for small businesses. Can we go ahead and just address that a little bit head on? Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think to start, it'd be interesting to kind of outline the context of corporate venture capital versus institutional venture capital, right? So you've got, fantastic OEMs that have corporate venture arms. HorizonX was the outright venture arm of Boeing. But those are going to be inherently a little bit more defensive in nature, right? Institutional venture capital is going to be inherently a little bit more offensive in nature. They're going to have different relationships with their investor bases. They're going to have different relationships to their theses. They're going to be willing to probably take risks for different reasons, more so or oftentimes around value creation events rather than intellectual property events or defensive positions, right? One of the reasons we're so excited about our partnership with Boeing is that it gives us the ability to function as both a defensive and offensive venture capital house, right? So we have a strategy where we're able to capture the defensive nuances of being able to go to subject matter experts within Boeing to help us validate our thesis, the product, leadership teams, et cetera. But then we're on the flip side able to go to our investment committee at AEI, A Industrial, and value the genetics or business merits of the opportunity itself, right? We think that we are very unique in this structure, in comparison to some of the other shops in the industry. That said, it's worth clarifying. We are a completely separate entity to Boeing. We have our own investment committee. It is chaired by one representative from the Boeing house, but all of our decisions, although oftentimes aligned, from a strategic standpoint with macro events inside the industry, all of our decisions are our own, right? So at no point as a founder or a leadership team do you have to be concerned with sharing data or sharing intellectual property with someone who you ultimately, may be trying to unseat or partner with, or work with in some capacity. So thank you for that opportunity. It's a common question that we get a lot, and it's nice to be able to address on a stage like this.
Wes, your turn for a fun question. Hope you're ready. Just kidding. So I think oftentimes we hear, and the folks working in the national security ecosystem who are trying to bring emerging technology, deliver it to the warfighter. We hear from the acquisition community that investing or, bringing onto contract small companies, new startups, that there's inherent risk involved there. I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit, maybe also give government's perspective on dual use.
Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of separate a little bit here. When we talk about the AppWorks and the SIBRs and the bringing the stuff on contract, I think that's one thing, and it's hard, but it's doable. And I think we've made a lot of progress in that. When I talk about where OSC's kind of thoughts are at, I want to kind of set the stage a little bit more as the focus of think about it as in investing. We are looking at working with investors to make sure that we can make sure they have access to the capital they need. And whether that be in the form of loans or loan guarantees or even equity type investments, depending on the kind of where we go. We see this throughout the whole of government. There's 118 federal credit programs in the government today, none of them at the Department of Defense, Justice, or Labor. And so that's putting us at a competitive disadvantage when we are expected to help develop and then get into the hands of warfighters the technologies of tomorrow. These types of tools can be more, that can help align incentives with the private sector in a faster way. And it's not necessarily just a procurement way, but to your point, there is inherently risk. And when we think about the government, everyone knows that we're not getting an end-of-year bonus. And so the downside risk is a higher, it rings truer to people in a lot of those capacities. That being said, I think our country is at a time where people are starting to realize that we are in a competition, and where heretofore the Department of Defense, when it said that we want to operate and execute in the economic instrument of power, it means we buy things and then those things do things. Kind of, I guess, the shift of what we're working on is that in this space, we can be more efficient and more effective by using dollars to do the things, working with our private sector, which is our competitive advantage, with our investors, where we do have a significant advantage in this space. And so while there is inherently risk in both the early stage, the things that we've talked about with the SIBRs, and we've worked with some of that with working through the reauthorization and knowing that we own that level of transparency and making sure that we're protecting those investments. But also, I guess my kind of retort would be the risk of not operating is much worse. And I think that we've started to see the outcomes of that, and we're starting to see what that looks like. And we're really trying to be a little more, there's a lot of reaction that we're seeing across all of our government, across from the Hill to the executive branch. We're trying to be proactive at OSC with finding those ways to be partnered, but not just to do it in a way where we have an emergency and we react, but we start early working with the private capital, working with our investors and our technologists to see what they need so we can continue to develop where we do have a competitive advantage of our technology today and in the future. I mean, that's patient capital, that's long-term thoughts, that's strategic vision. And those are the things that we're trying to bring to bear. And to be frank, there's a lot of progress. Huge thanks to the Secretary of Defense for giving us the time right now. A lot of you in this room have asked a lot of questions, and we've intentionally been not as overtly out there because we're really trying to fine tune what is going to be helpful. We want to do the research, not react to having to get out the door and make a decision that may not be the right decision. And that's given us a little leeway. So thank you to a lot of the experts in this room, a lot of the advice that we've gotten. We look forward to more of that and expect to hear more from us very soon. But know that we're trying to make sure that this is not just sitting in beanbag chairs and drinking kombucha, but actually getting out there and making the impact that we've heard from our friends in industry.
So we're going to close the panel here pretty soon, but what I'd like to do is end on a really positive note, and let's talk about the future. I think we've seen a lot of great things happen in Ukraine with commercial technology being adopted and being effective. So, for our panelists, and it'll be the same question for all of you so you can prepare. Can we talk a little bit about what you're excited for in the future?
Well, I'm in the fortunate position now, being part of Shield Capital, to see all of the incredible ideas that people have for what can be changed in the world. And so you see it across the technology spectrum. We're invested in AI, space, autonomy, and cyber. So you can imagine all of the game-changing ideas that we see there. But it's also for the entrepreneurial spirit in this country. When I think about the competition that we're in with China, nothing gives me more confidence in thinking about it's the entrepreneurial spirit, it's American competitiveness that's going to prevail in our system versus an authoritarian system that relies on the genius of just one person listening to people who are afraid to tell him the truth. So I have a lot of confidence in our system. So I think it's the young people, it's the incredible ideas, the spirit of entrepreneurship, and the ability to change what we see in the future and be able to make that future a reality sooner. I just hope that we have the political will, the sense of urgency to take advantage of that in our government processes so that we can leverage that in the competition.
Probably similar sentiment. It's funny to be someone who's lived on the West Coast and seen the highs and lows of Silicon Valley. Actually, I was an intern for IBM. This dates me when the .com collapse just totally unfolded. I saw lots of people, paper money, they're worth millions of dollars. I couldn't even get my head around that. And then, to see it burn to the ground and kind of re-rise. It feels right now in, even in San Francisco, that there's people are in some ways very aligned, investing in the future, investing in technologies, investing in America. And that feels really fun. And I'm very, excited to be a part of that. I think in the future, we will, the next 5 to 10 years, although we're politically divided all over the place, I think there's going to be a lot of incredible growth in building great new companies, great new technologies across the spectrum in the United States. And I'm excited to potentially be a part of that.
I think contextually, we're probably still in a seed state of sorts as to where we can really go with a lot of the technology and technology applications that we're seeing right now. And there's been such tremendous advancements by AFWorks, by DIU, by InQtel recently, right, that have really set up the rails for partnership between public and private capital. I'm personally just excited to see the innovation that comes from it, right? I mean, for the last decade, it feels like we've all been working uphill, and we've all been eager to, express, our frustrations with that. But I feel like now we are aligned, and we're aligned with the founders and leadership teams as well. So, I think it's exciting times, and, it needs to be, because ultimately we are in a great power competition, right? And then how we come together over this is ultimately gonna tell the story. So.
I'm excited about the conversations we're having now, because this is honestly what we think about is what is right with our system of government, what is right with our country, is that this is what we've seen where we've had our coming out of some of the things that we've been a little behind, that we've caught up, and that is leveraging. Everyone in this room has an incentive to make things better. And to the point, it's not just one person making the decisions, it's everybody coming together to solve that. And, I did not realize, you asked me maybe a year or so ago, I did not realize how many stakeholders are involved in this. There's a lot, and more every day. I keep finding them. But by and large, and really across the board, they are all aligned on the idea that it's time to do something. We got to quit talking about it. We need to be about it. And that is, that's the excitement I feel. We've seen, it's almost like we've started to seen the momentum really start to not just continue in the right direction, but accelerate in a way towards making some impact here, with both in and out of government. So, I mean, we see it every day, but I feel like it's a little bit different this time.
So I'd like to thank the audience for listening in to the panel today and humoring our questions and our comments. I think we've got a lot of exciting things to look forward to. We've come a long way. There are challenges and obstacles, but we've got a lot of things to look forward to. So thanks again to the panel. Big round of applause.